Good morning. Today is the third day of second Adar and the 13th of March. Let's continue with the tzimtzum, the contraction. So now he says the word tzimtzum has two meanings. One is contraction, condensation, like we said, that you take the essence out of something, like you make like they say, you make a tea essence, right? So you have the essence, so that's contraction. Where do we see that in Torah? We see that when it comes to the Aron, the Ark, that there's a statement that 600,000 stood in between the poles of the Aron. And when did this happen? It happened when they crossed the Jordan. Mm-hmm. The meaning, obviously, is metaphoric. Yes. What do you mean? 600,000. It's like that the sages say that one woman gave birth to 600,000 children in Egypt. What do they mean? So we know in a number of places this metaphor is explained. It means that there was one woman, in this case Yocheved, the wife of Amram, who gave birth to a child who was equal to 600,000 Jews. So we're talking about Moses. So Moshe Rabbeinu, he was born, and he's like 600,000. So one woman carried 600,000 souls, as it were. And there's a lot to say about that, because that means that the leader has to contain a connection, has to have a connection with all 600,000 soul roots, and so on. There's a lot to say there. And the same thing, when they crossed the Jordan, so I don't know who was the person that they referred to. I didn't go into it that deeply, and I didn't see an explanation like that, but there was somebody who stood in between the poles, and he was like he equated 600,000 Jews. Or it must be something else. It's equated with 600,000, not really 600,000. But in Chasidut and in Kabbalah, this is understood as a metaphor that means something. So the 600,000 could stand in a small space. So that happens so that's condensation. It's like you're saying, I'm taking the souls, or in some way the essence of the 600,000 people, and they fit in between the poles of the ark. Why the poles also? Why not somewhere else in the ark? It all has meaning. This metaphor has levels of meaning, but not the point right now. Same thing we say that when you stood in the courtyard of the temple in Yerushalayim, so they would stand and they would be very, very scrunched up. There was very little room. They would be like packed. And then there would come the moments when they needed to bow down. And in the temple, you don't bow down just on your knees, but fully on your palms and on your feet, completely prostrate. And they had room for that. And not only did they have room, it was with a lot. So how did that happen? So you say that this is like a condensation, like somehow either space stretched or they somehow condensed into. So that's like contraction. That's that meaning of contraction. But then he says the second meaning is concealment or occultation, which means concealment. Same thing.
Would that be the void we were speaking of?
Right. So this would mean that he becomes hidden. So if he becomes hidden, what do you have? You have a place that's void of his presence. Now this was understood in two different ways. Either it means concealment because he's gone, he's not here anymore, the light of the infinite, or the infinite light, which means that God's revelation of his infinite, his limitless aspect is now absent. So it could be either that it's concealed, but it's still here, it's just concealed, or it's really absent, it's really not here. But in either case, it means concealment or occultation. Though both these meanings apply in our context, when you talk about contraction, obviously the second one does so. Perhaps more than the first. So concealment is really what the Arizal meant. He didn't mean a condensation so much. Although again, that fits also. And Chasidus uses the other part, the idea of condensation, just as much as because he didn't say which one, and he's not a person who would leave things undefined unless it was a good reason to.
Who are you talking?
The Arizal.
The Arizal. Okay, yeah.
Meaning, Was this a question that was discussed before the Arizal? I don't know. I don't know enough to say whether it was discussed, whether we should think about the contraction. Because I mentioned that contraction was not something new, because creation ex nihilo assumes something like that. There has to be some gap. So is the gap just a concealment, or is the gap an actual absence, or is it just a condensation in some way, which is even more interesting. Actually, in Chasidus, the first option of condensation, of things becoming more...
like a thread, I think.
No, the thread is something else. That's later. Like a... again, I was trying to think of it. When you scrunch something and you make it really, really... you're able to minimize it. Like a minimalist picture of godliness, that itself has tremendous meaning in Chasidus, and it's explored in depth. So in any case, for the doctrine of tzimtzum refers to a refraction and concealment of the radiating emanation from the Godhead. Why they use this word Godhead, I have no idea. This is a Christian word.
Yeah.
I would not use it. We don't talk like this. So, a radiating emanation from God in a number of stages and in a progressive development of degrees until finite and physical substances become possible. So, the finite I agree with, the physical has nothing to do with it. Because again, physical...
Well, the finite is the physical, isn't it?
No, so that's the whole idea.
That's right.
That when you say finite, you could, for instance, talk about numbers. And you can say, well, I have a finite series of numbers. Let's say all the numbers that are even but under 100. So that's only 50 numbers, I think.
Yeah, it's a finite number.
It's a finite. And numbers are not something physical. You don't have to necessarily say that something that is finite is also physical.
Yes, you're right.
It's true, again, that the whole point of contraction, the whole point of tzimtzum is to allow me to have the physical.
Yes.
But the physical, the mistake, in my opinion, the mistake in the sentence is that it's not a progressive development. The physical appears suddenly, all at once. There's no progression in it. You have to go back to the story of creation to see what was meant. It appears. It just suddenly appears. It's like there's no previous state where it was somehow there.
Right.
No, it just appears.
Right.
The animals just appear. Man just appears. Yes. It's a whole different conception, and it's not the one that we have. Again, we have, especially because of evolution, which is not incorrect in its thinking, that things progress slowly, by degrees, by gradation. I remember the word I was looking for yesterday, plenitude it's called. Plenitude is another way of saying continuity that is filled, meaning that all the steps are somehow filled. Now you know that if it's continuous, you can't fill all the steps. There's always going to be gaps, there's always going to be a missing link. But still, plenitude is like the theory of it, that somehow everything is filled, everything is accounted for. All the different steps are here in front of us. So here, you can't say in the same sentence a progressive development of degrees and say physical substances. Because that's a contradiction. Because the physical substances appear without a gradation. This intricate theory is first treated in detail by Rabbi Isaac Luria. Again, I'm not sure. He writes here its roots are to be found in the Zohar, and he brings a couple of citations. I'm not sure that today's scholarship agrees with this. Tzimtzum was discussed because it had to be discussed, because it was creation ex nihilo. The moment you discuss creation ex nihilo, you're talking about some form of tzimtzum. Yes. Whether you call it that, whether you understand what it means, those are different questions. Yes. But this principle existed before. The basic works of his system all begin with an exposition of tzimtzum. That's true. Well, almost all his works. He mentions here Eitz Chaim, Mevo She'arim, Sha'ar Akdamot. All these were written either by Rav Chaim Vital or by others. However, this is the Sephardic tradition, and again, they received completely from Rabbi Chaim Vital. But we said that he had a previous student whose name was Rabbi Yisrael Srug, and he went to Europe, and he taught the Ramav Pano and others. So one of the Ramav Pano's students who wrote his work, Ramav Pano wrote a very Kabbalistic work, but it's not organized. it's philosophical, Kabbalistic. It's very meshed together. It's hard to follow the teachings of the Arizal in it. But there was another student, and his name was Naftali Bachrach, and he lived, I believe, in Krakow. And he wrote a book called Emek HaMelech. And he wrote the book based on what he had learned.
This is pre-Baal Shem Tov.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
We're talking about 120, 130 years before the Baal
yeah.
Shem Tov. And this was one of the Baal Shem Tov's favorite works, Emek HaMelech, and became a favorite work in Chasidus also, of those who studied Kabbalah. Not everybody in Chasidus studied Kabbalah, but those who did usually came to this book. And it does not start with the tzimtzum. Why not? Because, like we said, there were previous stages, and I said in the previous session that we had that the Arizal talked about this apparently to Rabbi Yisrael Srug, but later he didn't talk about this to Rav Chaim Vital, or at least told him it's not yet clear enough for you to write it down. So don't write it down. But there are previous stages. And in those stages, we don't talk about a tzimtzum in the way that he talks about in the books just mentioned. It's Chaim, Evo Sharim, Sharak Demot, all these. Rather, he talks about folding. There's a concept of folding. Folding is a huge concept. It's also a big concept in Torah, just in and of itself, just folding of something. It's a big concept in mathematics, folding of spaces, and there's so much in folding. It's just a beautiful thing. Then you can go to origami, right? Folding paper is one of these things. And you think, how are all these things related? Well, you have to think about folding not just as an act, but as a concept. What does folding do? In any case, in those earlier stages, which called the world of Malbush, the world of the garment, garments are folded, right? You don't, like when you want to do something with a garment, you fold it.
Again, I'm a little confused. What period are we talking about? Are we talking about pre-creation?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
That there's stages before.
Before, yes.
In any case, just leave this. Reb Shneur Zalman partly deals with it in the Tanya, more extensively in Shari Yichud V'Emunah, the second part of the Tanya, and above all in Torah or in Likutei Torah, and he gives here some very good citations, where to look to see what he says about tzimtzum. The big book that talks about tzimtzum is Samach Vav, I believe. What we call in Chassidus Tafri Samach Vav, the teachings of the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe, in the year 5666, which is 1906. Sorry, 1906. And that whole book, it's quite a big book. During most of the year, he talked about the concept of tzimtzum, and he gave tremendous insight into the whole affair, like what was going on. It's interesting. He doesn't mention. Maybe he'll mention it later. Here it is. Here he says it. Okay.
Oh, he does?
Yeah. He mentions it in citations. I now see it. Okay. Prior to creation, there is but God alone. God, as He is in Himself, is called Ein Sof, the infinite. Again, when we say He's the infinite, we don't mean that He's the infinite because what? He doesn't include the finite. He also includes the finite. So He's not just the infinite. What we mean to say is prior to creation, He only, as it were, revealed His infinite aspect, but did not reveal so much His limited aspect. So creation is the revelation of God's finite aspect. That's how a Kabbalist would not a Kabbalist. It's how a Hasidic Kabbalist would think about what is the act of creation. It's a moment that God decides. It's not a moment because there's no time yet, but it's the revelation of His finite aspect. To do that, of course, He has to conceal in some sense His infinite aspect. And that's what we said about tzimtzum. Tzimtzum means concealment. But it also could mean condensation. Because if, for instance, I mentioned before, all the even numbers between 0 and 100, that's like a condensed form of all the even numbers.
Yes.
Maybe you could condense it in some way.
Yes.
That's what mathematicians like to do. In any case, he that is without limit, without end, that's the Ein Sof Of God as Ein Sof, nothing can be postulated except that He is Ein Sof, high above all heights, hidden beyond all concealments. No thought can grasp you at all. You have no known name, for you fill all names, and you are the perfection of them all. These are all statements from where does he take these statements from? Yeah, from the Tikkunei Zohar, from the introduction. We say this every Friday night. Okay, so I think we're going to have to end here.
Quick question. I was listening to one of the gems,
Yeah.
and it was talking about this is going back, who went to the Rebbe about how to teach scientific things. Not scientific, but like how to give over explaining creation to students or whatever it was. I don't know exactly. But there was a statement at the end that they said that the Rebbe said, okay, does the Earth revolve around the moon or the sun, or the sun revolve around? The Rebbe said the theory of relativity basically says it could be either way. Is that?
Yeah,
This
that's the whole point of relativity, is to say that there's not one preferred perspective. You could take the center anywhere you want, and you could build the whole thing. The science says something a little bit different. It says, I'm not so interested in what the perspective is. What I'm interested in is making it simple. And the equations are much more complex if I decide that the center of the universe will be Alpha Centauri. I don't know, something like that. However, general relativity says that basically pick any point in the universe and everything is expanding from that point. It's a very strange, one of the strange conclusions of general relativity. So he didn't mean that. What he really meant was something else. He had a problem, and we have this problem, that all the literature that deals with the commandments that have to do with the solar system, for instance, sanctifying the new moon that we just had. So those commandments are written with the earth as the center. They're not written with the sun in the center. So you read the Rambam, there's a whole tradition of 2,000 years of doing this. So what do? Do you now come and say, oh, this is all from the wrong perspective? So he says, no, every perspective is fine. And when it comes to the sun and the moon and the earth, because it's a three-body problem, it doesn't really matter what you take as the center. It doesn't really matter. It's not going to make it more complex or less complex. The calculations are not less complex because it's a three-body. If it was just a two-body problem, it would be easier. But when you want to explain the solar system as a whole, it's easier to take the sun as the center. But when you're talking about the relationship just between the earth and the moon is revolving, that no one debates, that you could debate it. According to general relativity, you could say the moon is the center, we're revolving around it. But we don't see it that way. And the way that the calculations are done is that we're in the center. It doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference if you say that we're revolving around the sun and the moon is revolving around us, or you just ignore the sun for all intents and matters, and you just say, what is the relationship between the sun and the moon, between the earth and the moon? And then it becomes a two-body problem. It doesn't matter really. So that's what he's saying. He's saying, we can't say that all these books are wrong because they're not wrong.
So he uses, we knew this before. This is not a chiddush from Einstein.
I think it is.
Oh, it is?
I don't think anybody thought. By the way, I don't think the Rebbe agrees with Einstein. That's a different matter. Really? He has a lot of. He heard Einstein. He spoke to Einstein.
I know. Yeah.
He was in Berlin when Einstein was.
Even
what
here, in
New
York.
You know him in New York.
He was called to a meeting.
I was told this story this time that I was in America a couple of months ago, and somebody told me this story that. I don't remember. Wow, I lost the pieces of the story because I didn't really believe it. But it fit all the.
Father was Rabbi Levitansky's father.
Yeah.
Well, went to the Frediker, and he also paid his respects to the Rebbe. You know?
Okay.
And he asked,
where is he now? Where is he now?
He's with Einstein.
He's with Einstein. So that I almost 100% know that means, doesn't mean that he went to see Einstein, it means that he was studying physics at the time. And that's how they used to say things. He's with this person, he's with that person. But I heard a different story about an emissary that was sent, either from Einstein himself or from somebody near Einstein, sent to the Rebbe to ask about certain things. But it doesn't matter. All these stories, I don't know if I believe them or not. It doesn't matter. The point is that he writes enough about Einstein that I know that he understood relativity very, very well, at a very high level that most people don't understand it today. Because he understood the root of relativity, where it came from. What were the other options? There were very important other options at the time, and they weren't chosen for, one would say, political reasons. And he didn't agree with Einstein's solution to the ether problem at all. He thought, and I have a lot to say about why he didn't agree, not just because he says it's convoluted, it's the most irrational solution you could find. Unintuitive, and nobody can live this way. You can't say that all the perspectives are equal. That's crazy. Like, we don't feel that way. What is that? That's democracy, and it doesn't work. Because even in the democracy, you have kings and queens.
Yeah.
Because you have to choose that one perspective is going to be more important than all the others.
Yes.
This is not anarchy.
No.
Anarchy doesn't work right now. Maybe in the future sometime.
It would be a beautiful thing in theory.
Right. But in practice, it's not like that. And he, again, I think that bears a lot on how he sees the whole issue with the ether. Ether was supposed to give us a non-universalistic or egalitarian perspective of reality. It was supposed to give us the feeling that we have, that we're the center, Earth is the center, and there's a good reason to say it, and so on and so forth. Anyway, there's a lot to talk about that.